The champagne tower caught the light like a monument to everything I was never supposed to touch. 300 of the wealthiest people in the city surrounded me, their laughter floating through crystal chandeliers, and my ex-husband stood 15 feet away, his voice carrying across the space like he wanted me to hear every word. "She could not keep up," Julian said to the men around him. His hand gripped champagne flute with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the world existed to accommodate him. "We were married for 4 years. She was sweet, you know. Had potential, but some people are just not built for this level." She plateaued. One of his companions glanced in my direction. "What happened to her?" Julian shrugged. "Last I heard, she was still running some little charity operation overseas. Building schools or something." He laughed, and the sound cut through me like glass. "Admirable, I suppose. Not everyone has the stomach for real work, the kind that actually matters." I stood frozen. My emerald gown suddenly felt too tight. The gold cuffs on my wrists felt like shackles. The room seemed to shrink around me, and for one terrible moment I was 29 again, sitting in a lawyer's office, signing papers that ended 4 years of my life while Julian checked his phone. "She was a charity case," Julian continued, louder now. "Probably still is. Some people just need to accept their place, you know." His companions laughed. The sound echoed through my chest like a physical blow. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to turn around and walk out of the Ashton Grand Hotel and never look back. I wanted to forget I had ever loved a man who could reduce me to nothing with a single sentence. But then I felt a hand on my shoulder, warm, familiar, steady, and a voice behind me said the 5 words that changed everything. "Sorry I am late, love. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who once claimed to love you, someone who knew exactly where to cut because they had held you close enough to find every soft spot? Someone who looked at your dreams and called them small, looked at your ambitions and called them modest, looked at everything you were and decided it was not enough?" Julian Mercer thought he had broken me. He thought 3 years was long enough for me to stay broken. He thought tonight would be another opportunity to remind me of my place, to show his wealthy friends the woman who could not keep up, to prove to himself that leaving me was the right decision. What he did not know was that the man standing behind me, the man whose hand rested gently on my shoulder, was about to change everything. What happens when the woman you dismissed walks back into your world and she is no longer playing by your rules? What happens when the charity case turns out to be more than you ever imagined? What happens when the man watching from across the room is not just any man, but someone whose name makes billionaires nervous? Stay with me until the end, because this night did not just change how people saw me, it changed how I saw myself. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to where this all started, back to the invitation that sat on my desk for 3 weeks. Back to the marriage that almost destroyed me, and back to the moment I decided to stop being small. Before we dive in, if you love stories about comebacks, redemption, and women who refuse to stay small, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, the kind of stationery that whispered old money louder than words ever could. The Foundation for Global Education's annual benefit, $5,000 a plate, black tie mandatory. I set it on my desk and tried to forget it existed. For 3 weeks it sat there. Every morning I would glance at it while drinking my coffee. Every evening I would consider throwing it away. And every night I would lie awake wondering why I was so afraid of a piece of paper. The answer, of course, was not the paper, it was what the paper represented, a world I had walked away from, a world that had walked away from me. The world where Julian Mercer still moved like a king, surrounded by people who believed his version of our story. My phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. Victoria Chen, the Foundation's director, her voice carried the particular warmth of someone who genuinely believed in her cause. "Amara," she said, "please tell me you are coming. I have not decided yet." "The children in Nairobi," she continued, "the ones from the Kibera program, they are going to be featured in our presentation. Your curriculum, your schools, the donors need to hear from you directly. I stared at the invitation. Victoria, I appreciate the thought, but there are other people who can speak about the program, people who are more comfortable with these events. There are no other people, she said firmly. You built this, you designed the curriculum, you spent 6 months living in a village with no running water, because you believed education could change lives. The donors need to see that passion, they need to hear your voice. I closed my eyes, the memories surfaced unbidden. Dust roads and children's laughter. The first time a little girl named Zawadi read her own name aloud. The weight of her arms around my neck when she realized what she had accomplished. Some things matter more than comfort. Fine, I said. I will be there, Victoria exhaled. Thank you, and Amara. Whatever you are worried about, whatever is holding you back, remember who you are, not who anyone else says you are, who you actually are. I hung up and looked at the invitation again. The Ashton Grand Hotel, Saturday evening, 8 o'clock. Julian would be there. I knew it without asking. These events were his hunting ground, his stage, his kingdom. He collected wealthy connections the way other people collected art, displaying them at every opportunity. But I had spent 3 years rebuilding myself from the rubble he left behind. 3 years remembering who I was before I spent all my energy trying to be what he needed. 3 years learning that my worth was never his to determine. I picked up the invitation and slid it into my calendar. Whatever happened Saturday night, I would face it standing up. The evening of the gala, I stood in front of my mirror and studied my reflection. Emerald silk gown that hugged my brown skin like it was woven just for me. Locks swept into an elegant updo, secured with gold pins my grandmother had given me before she passed. Gold cuffs on my wrists. Minimal makeup, because I had learned that my face did not need much to command attention. I did not dress to impress anyone at this gala. I dressed because I had learned to never enter any room as anything less than exactly who I am. My phone buzzed. A text message, flight landed. Traffic looks manageable. Should arrive within the hour. You have got this. I smiled and typed back. I know. The response came immediately. That is my girl. I set down the phone and took one last look at myself. The woman in the mirror was not the same woman who had signed divorce papers 3 years ago. That woman had been hollowed out, emptied of everything that made her who she was. That woman had believed Julian when he told her she was not enough. This woman knew better. To understand what happened at the Ashton Grand Hotel, you need to understand what came before. You need to understand the marriage that almost destroyed me. And you need to understand why Julian's words that night cut so deep, even after all these years. I met Julian Mercer when I was 26 years old. I was working for a small non-profit focused on literacy programs in underserved communities. The pay was modest. The hours were long. The work was everything I had ever wanted to do with my life. Julian was 32, a rising star in venture capital. He walked into our cramped office one afternoon, sent by his firm to evaluate us for a potential grant. He wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, and he looked at our peeling paint and second-hand furniture like he had wandered into another dimension. But when I started explaining our work, something shifted in his face. He leaned forward. He asked questions, real questions, not the performative kind that wealthy people asked when they wanted to seem interested. He wanted to know about retention rates and curriculum development and long-term outcomes. After the meeting, he asked me to coffee. I said no. He asked again the next week. I said no again. The third time, he showed up at one of our community events, rolled up his sleeves, and spent 4 hours helping kids with their reading exercises. A 6-year-old named Marcus tugged on his expensive tie and asked if he was a superhero. Julian laughed and said, "No, Buddy, the superheroes are the people who work here every day. I am just visiting." That was the moment I started to fall. What I did not understand then was that Julian was performing. He was very good at identifying what people wanted to see and becoming exactly that, just long enough to get what he wanted. What he wanted at that moment was me. The courtship was everything I had never experienced. Flowers delivered to my office. Dinners at restaurants I could not pronounce. Weekend trips to places I had only seen in magazines. He pursued me with the same intensity he brought to his business deals, and I mistook that intensity for genuine passion. When I told him I was planning a trip to Kenya to visit a school we were partnering with, he said he wanted to come. "You do not have to do that," I told him. "It is not glamorous. The village does not have running water. The accommodations are basic." He looked at me with those eyes that I thought I knew. "I want to understand your world, Amara, all of it." So he came, and for 5 days I watched him sleep on a thin mattress, eat food he could not identify, and play soccer with children who had never seen anyone who looked like him. He helped carry water. He sat through 3-hour community meetings. He held a baby while her mother received medical treatment at the local clinic. On the last night, sitting under stars more brilliant than anything visible from American cities, he took my hand. "Marry me," he said. I was 27 years old. I was in love. I said yes. The first 2 years of our marriage felt like a partnership. Julian supported my work. He made introductions to potential donors. He attended my events, stood by my side, smiled for photographs. When I talked about expanding our programs, he listened with what seemed like genuine interest. But slowly, so slowly, I almost did not notice. Things began to shift. It started with small comments. Observations that felt like advice but carried an edge. "You know," he would say during dinner, "these events you attend, they are fine for networking with other non-profit people. But if you want to make real connections, you should come to my firm's gatherings instead. That is where the actual money is." Or when I mentioned a new curriculum I was developing, he would nod and say, "That sounds interesting. But have you considered pivoting to something more scalable, something that could attract serious investors, as if the people funding schools for children who had nothing were not serious, as if the work I had dedicated my life to was just a hobby waiting to be upgraded." I started to adjust. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in all the small ways that accumulate into something devastating. I spoke less at dinner parties. I deferred to his opinions. I began to see my own ambitions through his eyes, and through his eyes they always seemed somehow insufficient. One evening, we attended a gala, much like the one I would face years later. A wealthy donor approached me, asked about my work, seemed genuinely interested. "That is wonderful," she said. "We need more people like you doing this kind of grassroots work." Julian appeared at my elbow. "Amara is being humble," he said smoothly. "She is still figuring out her next steps, exploring options. You know how it is with these passion projects." The woman's expression flickered. "Of course," she said, and I watched her interest fade in real time. Later that night, I confronted him. "Why did you say that?" I asked. "Why did you make it sound like my work was not real?" He looked at me with something close to pity. "Amara, I was trying to help you. You cannot lead with the small stuff. These people, they think in terms of scale, impact. You need to present yourself as someone with vision, not someone stuck in the weeds." "I am not stuck in the weeds. I am doing the actual work," he sighed. "That is exactly what I mean. You do not understand how this world operates. You are thinking too small, playing it safe. If you want to be taken seriously, you need to learn to think bigger." I stood there in our expensive living room, wearing a dress he had bought me, surrounded by furniture he had chosen, and I realized I could not remember the last time I had made a decision without wondering what he would think of it. The breaking point came 18 months before the end. I received an offer. A major international organization wanted me to lead a new education initiative across 3 countries. It was everything I had worked toward. The opportunity to take my curriculum, my methods, everything I had developed, and implement it on a scale I had only dreamed about. The salary was modest. The prestige was immense. I told Julian over dinner, expecting him to share my excitement. He set down his fork and looked at me like I had suggested something absurd. "That salary," he said, "that is not even close to what you could be making if you leveraged your connections properly. It is not about the money, Julian. This is an opportunity to actually change things, to reach hundreds of thousands of children." He shook his head slowly. "Amara, you are not thinking clearly. You would be stepping back, not forward, taking a pay cut, working for an organization that, let us be honest, does not have the influence you think it does. This is not the move. This is exactly the move. This is what I have been working toward since before I met you." His expression hardened. "And how much of that time have you actually spent building something sustainable? Something that matters in the real world? You have been playing in the minor leagues, Amara. I have been trying to help you see that, but you refuse to listen. Playing in the minor leagues." I stared at him across the dinner table, across the gulf that had opened between us without my noticing, and I realized that every piece of advice he had ever given me, every suggestion, every observation, had been designed to make me smaller, to keep me in an orbit around his ambitions rather than pursuing my own. "You want me to turn it down," I said slowly. "You want me to say no to the biggest opportunity of my career because it does not fit your vision of what success looks like. I want you to be realistic." He reached for his wine. "You will never be comfortable where I am going. The circles I move in now, the deals I am making, the people I am connecting with, that requires a certain mindset, a certain ambition, and honestly, Amara, I am not sure you have it." The words hung between us like smoke. I looked at my husband. I looked at the man who had pursued me relentlessly, who had flown to Kenya to sleep on a thin mattress, who had held a baby while her mother received treatment, and I saw finally that man had been a performance, a role he had played to win a prize he no longer valued. The divorce was his idea. 3 weeks after that dinner conversation, Julian sat me down in the living room and told me he thought we should separate. His reasons came wrapped in the language of concern. "We have grown apart. We want different things. I do not want to hold you back from whatever it is you think you need to do." But beneath the careful phrasing, the message was clear. I had failed to become the wife he wanted. I had failed to transform myself into an accessory for his ambition. I had failed to be small enough to make him feel big. "This is for both of us," he said, his tone gentle in a way that felt more cruel than anger would have been. "You will thank me eventually. Some people just are not built for this level. Not built for this level." I signed the papers in a sterile office on a Tuesday morning. Julian checked his phone throughout the meeting. When it was done, he shook my hand like I was a business contact he was unlikely to see again. I walked out alone. For the first month, I slept 14 hours a day. The apartment I rented after the divorce was small, a studio in a building that smelled like other people's cooking. I told myself it was temporary, a place to land while I figured out my next move. But there was no next move. There was only grief and shame and the terrible suspicion that Julian had been right, that I was not built for his level, that I had reached the ceiling of what someone like me could achieve. Friends stopped calling, or maybe I stopped answering. The people who had surrounded us during the marriage turned out to be his people, collected and curated for his benefit. Without him, they had no use for me. My family tried to help. My mother called every Sunday with gentle encouragement. My sister sent care packages. But underneath their support, I sensed the unspoken words. The "I told you so" that no one wanted to say, but everyone was thinking. One morning, 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I could not get out of bed. Not physically could not. There was nothing wrong with my body, but the weight of everything I had lost, everything I had allowed myself to lose, pressed down on me until movement seemed impossible. What was the point? Julian had taken my confidence along with everything else. Without it, I did not know who I was or what I was supposed to do next. My phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, voicemail again. The third time, something made me answer. "Amara." The voice was familiar. "Diane Mitchell, a colleague from my non-profit days. I have been trying to reach you for weeks. I am sorry," I managed. "I have been dealing with some things. I heard about the divorce. I am so sorry. But listen, the reason I am calling, we have a situation, the literacy program in Senegal. The one we partnered on 3 years ago. It is failing. The local team is overwhelmed. The curriculum is not translating properly, and the funding is about to be pulled unless someone can turn it around." He closed. My eyes. "Diane, I am not really in a position to. You are the only person who can do this," she interrupted. "You designed the original program. You understand the methodology better than anyone. If you do not help, 6,000 children are going to lose access to education. 6,000 children. I thought about Zawadi in Nairobi, reading her name for the first time. I thought about Marcus, the 6-year-old, who asked Julian if he was a superhero. I thought about every child who had ever looked at me with hope in their eyes, because I represented the possibility that their future could be different. And then I thought about my grandmother, her voice in my memory clear as it had been when she was alive. Some people can only love you if you are willing to stay smaller than they are. I had been small for Julian. I had shrunk myself to fit inside his vision of who I should be, and when I could not shrink any further, he had thrown me away. But I was still here, still breathing, still capable of doing the work that had given my life meaning before he ever entered it. "What do you need me to do?" I asked Diane. That phone call saved my life. Within a week, I was on a plane to Senegal. Within a 2-month, I had restructured the entire program. The curriculum was adapted, the local team was retrained, the funding was renewed, and somewhere in the middle of all that work I remembered who I was. Year 1 after the divorce was about survival. I threw myself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. 16-hour days. Weekends spent on video calls with partners in 3 different time zones. I said yes to every opportunity, every challenge, every invitation to prove that I was more than Julian's ex-wife. The first school I built entirely under my own direction was completed in a village in rural Kenya. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small. Just me, the local team, and the community members who had donated land and labor to make it happen. But when I watched children walk through those doors for the first time, something cracked open in my chest. This was who I was. This was what I was meant to do, and no one, not Julian, not anyone, could take that away from me. Year 2 was about expansion. The Kenya program attracted attention. Other organizations reached out. Governments in 3 countries expressed in adopting my curriculum. I found myself speaking at conferences, sitting on panels, being interviewed by journalists who wanted to understand how a small non-profit director had built something that was changing the conversation about global education. One of those conferences was in Boston, Micro-Investment Strategies in Developing Markets. I was invited to present on how small, targeted investments could create sustainable educational infrastructure in communities that traditional philanthropy had ignored. I was nervous. The audience would be different from what I was used to. Investors, analysts, people who spoke in terms of returns and valuations, people who might look at my work and see exactly what Julian had always seen. Something small, something not serious. But I had learned to stop caring what people like that thought. I gave my presentation, 45 minutes on methodology, outcomes, and scalability. I talked about children like Zawadi and Marcus. I talked about mothers who had walked 10 miles to attend parent meetings because they believed education could change their families' futures. I talked about the numbers, yes, but also about the human beings behind those numbers. When I finished, the applause was genuine. People approached afterward with questions, with business cards, with offers of collaboration. For the first time in my professional life, I felt like I was being seen for exactly who I was. By 8 o'clock that evening, I was exhausted. The hotel bar was nearly empty. I found a seat in the corner, ordered a cup of coffee, and pulled out my laptop to answer emails. The adrenaline of the presentation was fading, replaced by the bone-deep tiredness of someone who had been running on determination alone. A man sat 3 seats away, also alone, also tired from the look of him. He was reading something on his phone, occasionally glancing up at the television mounted above the bar. I noticed him noticing my conference badge, but did not think much of it. People had been approaching me all day. I was not in the mood for another conversation about funding models, but he did not approach. He just sat there drinking what looked like coffee, minding his own business. 30 minutes passed. I finished my emails. He finished his reading, and then, without looking up from my laptop, I heard myself say, "You were in the 3rd row." During my presentation, he looked over, surprised, maybe, that I had noticed. I was, he confirmed. "You have a gift for making numbers feel human, thank you." I closed my laptop. Most people in that room were just waiting for the ROFI projections. He smiled slightly. Most people in that room do not understand that RI means nothing if you are measuring the wrong outcomes. that got my attention. I turned to face him properly for the first time. Dark suit, no tie, close-cropped hair with hints of grey at the temples, features that suggested confidence more than conventional, handsomeness, and eyes that seemed to be genuinely listening, not just waiting for their turn to speak. "What outcomes would you measure?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "Whether children who go through your program believe they have options, whether their parents believe it, whether the community sees itself differently after a school opens. Those things are harder to quantify, but they are what actually matter." I stared at him. In 4 years of marriage to Julian, he had never once asked me what outcomes I was trying to achieve. He had assumed he already knew, and that those outcomes were not serious enough to warrant real attention. This stranger, in 30 seconds, had demonstrated more genuine interest in my work than my ex-husband had in 4 years. "I am Amara," I said. "Amara Rhodes." "I know." He extended his hand. "I read the program. Your bio was impressive, but your presentation was better. And you are." He hesitated for just a moment. Something flickered in his expression that I would not understand until later. "Dominic," he said. "Just Dominic for now, if that is all right." We talked for 3 hours. He asked about my work, not the polished version I gave to donors, but the real version, the challenges, the failures, the moments when I had wanted to quit and the reasons I had not. He asked about my curriculum development process, about how I adapted materials for different cultural contexts, about the partnerships that had worked and the ones that had fallen apart. And when I asked about his work, he was vague. "Investments," he said, "trying to figure out how to make capital do something useful." At 11 o'clock, the bartender announced last call. "I should go," I said, though I did not want to. Dominic nodded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, plain white, simple font. "Just a name and a phone number, if you ever want to continue this conversation," he said. "No pressure, no expectations. I just think you are doing something important, and I would like to hear more about it." I took the card and looked at it. Dominic Ashford. The name meant nothing to me at the time. I slipped it into my purse and smiled. "Thank you for the conversation. And for the coffee. You bought your own coffee. I know, but you made it feel less lonely." He walked me to the elevator. We said goodnight, and when the doors closed between us, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. If you are enjoying this story so far, drop a comment telling me, have you ever met someone who saw you before they knew what you had? Those connections hit different, and while you are at it, smash that like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. I did not Google Dominic Ashford until a week later. I had been busy back-to-back meetings with potential partners, a site visit in Ghana, late nights reviewing curriculum modifications. The business card sat in my purse, occasionally crossing my mind but never quite making it to the top of my priority list. Then, on a Sunday morning, I finally typed his name into a search engine. The results loaded. I stared at my screen for a full minute without moving. Dominic Ashford, founder and CEO of Ashford Holdings, net worth somewhere north of $11 billion, depending on which publication you asked, real estate, tech investments, renewable energy infrastructure, the kind of portfolio that made other billionaires nervous. And he had sat in a hotel bar, drinking coffee, asking me about my little literacy programs, like they were the most fascinating thing he had ever heard. I called my sister. "You talked to Dominic Ashford for 3 hours, she said. The Dominic Ashford, I did not know who he was. Amara. His face has been on magazine covers. He testified before Congress last year about climate investment. I do not read those magazines, and I do not watch congressional hearings." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to call him?" "I do not know. This feels like a different situation now. What if he was just being polite? What if this is some kind of weird philanthropic outreach thing? What if it is not?" I looked at the business card again. Plain white, simple font, nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. If I wanted someone impressed by my money, a voice in my memory said, "I would not have waited 3 weeks to call you." He had not told me who he was because he wanted me to see him, not the headlines, not the net worth, just the man in the hotel bar who thought my work mattered. I picked up my phone. Our first date was at a museum, an exhibit on African art. I chose it deliberately. If he was serious about understanding my world, this would be a test. These pieces, this history, this culture, it mattered to me in ways I could not easily explain. I arrived early. 10 minutes later he walked in, and he had done his research. Not the kind of shallow research that lets someone name-drop artists and sound impressive. Real research. He had read essays about the historical context of the pieces. He had watched documentaries about the cultural traditions they represented. He asked questions that showed he had actually thought about what he was seeing. "Why this exhibit?" I asked him halfway through. He looked at me with those eyes that always seemed to be genuinely listening. "Because you said your grandmother gave you gold cuffs from Nigeria." And I wanted to understand what that meant. I had mentioned my grandmother once, a passing comment during our 3-hour conversation in Boston. He had remembered. We walked through the entire exhibit. We had dinner afterward at a small restaurant. He had clearly chosen because it was quiet, not because it was expensive. We talked until they started putting chairs on tables. At the end of the night, standing outside the restaurant, I finally asked the question I had been avoiding. "Why did you not tell me who you were?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I have spent 20 years watching people change. When they find out, their posture shifts, their questions change. They start calculating what they can get instead of actually listening. I did not want that with you. And now that I know," he looked at me steadily, "now I am hoping you will give me a chance to show you that the man in the hotel bar is the real one. The name, the money, that is just context. It is not who I am." I studied his face, looking for the performance Julian had been so good at. Looking for the angle. I did not find one. "Okay," I said. "But I am not moving into your penthouse," he laughed. "I would not ask you to, and I am not changing my name, or my work, or anything about how I live my life. I would not want you to. And if this does not work out, I am walking away with exactly what I came in with. Nothing more." He nodded slowly. "That seems fair. Can I ask for something in return?" "What dinner next week? Somewhere you choose, and you tell me more about the curriculum you are developing for the West Africa expansion." I almost smiled. "That sounds like work talk disguised as a date." He grinned. "Is it working?" "Despite everything," I laughed. "Pick me up at 7. 6 months later, I was in my small apartment grading curriculum proposals when Dominic asked me to marry him. There was no grand gesture, no helicopter ride, or skywriting or flash mob. Just the two of us on my second-hand couch, papers spread across the coffee table, take-out containers from the Thai place down the street. "Do you want to build something together?" he asked. I looked up from the proposal I was reviewing. I thought we already were. The school expansion in Tanzania, the partnership with the Ministry of Education. He was quiet for a moment. I mean something else. And then I saw the box in his hand, small, simple, nothing ostentatious, Amara. "I have watched you rebuild your life from the ground up. I have watched you turn pain into purpose and doubt into determination. I have seen you at your worst and your best, and there is nothing you could show me that would make me want you less." He opened the box, a single stone, elegant, understated. "Will you marry me?" I stared at the ring, stared at him, stared at my cramped apartment and my messy papers and my complicated, imperfect, beautiful life. "Only if you understand something," I said, "anything. I will never be a trophy. I will never be an accessory. I will never shrink myself to fit into your world. If you marry me, you get all of this, the work, the travel, the obsessive attention to detail. The nights when I am too exhausted to be good company, you get all of it or none of it." He closed the box and set it down. Then he took my hands. "Amara, I am not looking for a trophy. I have had opportunities for trophies. They do not interest me." He squeezed my fingers. "I am looking for a partner, someone who will challenge me, someone who will keep me honest, someone who sees money as a tool, not a destination. And I have spent 6 months realizing that person is you." I looked at our hands, brown skin against brown skin, his fingers strong and steady around mine. "Yes," I said, "but we are keeping this private." He raised an eyebrow. "Private? I have seen what public scrutiny does to relationships. I have seen how people change when cameras are involved. I want to protect what we have from all of that. At least for now. He nodded slowly. Your timeline. Not the world's. We were married 3 weeks later. Courthouse ceremony. 2 witnesses. My grandmother's Bible in my hands. No press coverage. No magazine spreads. No announcements. Dominic Ashford married Amara Rhodes, and the world did not know. For 18 months, we kept our secret. It was not easy attending events separately, coordinating schedules so we were never photographed together, explaining to confused colleagues why I would not discuss my personal life, but it was worth it. Our relationship grew in privacy, away from the speculation and judgment that would have accompanied any public announcement. I continued my work under my maiden name. He continued his work as he always had, and when we came home to each other at night, we were just 2 people who loved each other. But deep down I knew the truth. Eventually the worlds we moved through would intersect. Eventually someone would figure it out. Eventually we would have to step into the light together. I just did not expect it to happen like this. The town car pulled up to the Ashton Grand Hotel at exactly 8 o'clock. I stepped out. The cobblestone entrance gleamed under the golden light of antique street lamps. The building rose like a monument to excess, all marble columns and crystal-paned windows, reflecting the last light of sunset. I smoothed the front of my gown emerald silk, grandmother's gold pins in my hair, gold cuffs on my wrists. I did not dress for the people inside. I dressed for myself. Inside, the air carried the scent of expensive perfume and barely concealed ambition. The ballroom was stunning. I admitted that cascading flowers dripping from crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing something classical and forgettable, tables arranged with the precision of a chessboard. I scanned the room for Victoria. Instead, my phone buzzed, running behind. The text read, 30 minutes max. Your table is near the stage, front left. The card says Rhodes. I weaved through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, ignoring curious glances, and that was when I saw him. Julian Mercer standing near the champagne tower like he owned the place, surrounded by men in tailored tuxedos, laughing at something someone had said. My entire body went cold. 3 years. 3 years since I had seen him in person. 3 years since he shook my hand like I was a business contact he would never see again. 3 years since he told me I was not built for his level. His eyes found mine before I could look away. The laugh died on his lips. I kept walking. I did not alter my path. I did not speed up or slow down. I moved toward my table with the kind of deliberate calm that had taken years to cultivate. Amara, his voice, reached me before his footsteps did. I turned. He had already crossed half the distance between us, still handsome in that polished, practiced way, still carrying himself like the world was lucky to have him. I did not expect to see you here, he said. His eyes traveled down my gown, then back to my face. The foundation invited me, I replied. I am presenting tonight, presenting. He tilted his head, and there it was, that flicker of condescension I had learned to recognize too late. What topic? My work. Literacy programs in East Africa. Ah, he nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth twitching. Still doing the non-profit thing. He paused. That is admirable, Amara, really. Not everyone has the stomach for real work, the kind that actually matters. I felt the words like a knife finding an old wound. I should find my seat, I said. Of course. He smiled that polished, meaningless smile. Good luck with your little speech. I walked away without responding. Behind me, voices carried. Who was that? One of his companions. Julian's answer floated across the space. My ex-wife. We were married for a while. What happened? She could not keep up. And then the words that stopped me cold. Some people just are not built for this level. She was a charity case. Probably still is. I stood frozen. The emerald gown suddenly felt too tight. The gold cuffs felt like shackles. The room seemed to shrink. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to list every school I had built, every life I had changed, every recognition I had received since he decided I was not enough. But I did not, because Julian's opinion had stopped mattering a long time ago. I found my table and sat down. The chair beside me was empty, reserved for a guest who had not yet arrived. Around me, other seats filled with faces I recognized from philanthropy circuits and financial magazines. The table seemed to hum with the particular energy of people who measured success by the size of their portfolios. A woman sat down across from me, silver hair, sharp eyes, a silk jacket that probably cost more than my first car. She extended her hand. Geneva Price. And you must be the remarkable Amara Rhodes, thank you. It is a pleasure. I have read about your work. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. 37 schools in 6 years. Quite an accomplishment for someone working below the radar. I managed a small smile. I prefer letting the work speak. Smart approach. Her gaze flicked across the room. That man near the champagne tower. He keeps looking over here. Friend of yours, former husband. Ah, her expression sharpened with understanding. The worst kind of acquaintance. More guests arrived, an ambassador, a publishing heiress, the CEO of a sustainable energy company. They exchanged pleasantries, performed the social choreography of people who had done this 1,000 times. And then Julian appeared at our table with an older man in tow. Geneva, how wonderful to see you. His voice was honey and practice. He gestured toward me. Have you met my former wife? Amara runs a small charity operation overseas. Geneva's eyes flashed. I am aware of Miss Rhodes's work. We were just discussing it. We're you. Julian smiled as if indulging a child. Amara always did have a soft heart. It is sweet, really. He turned to address the table. Not everyone has the disposition for serious philanthropy. The kind that requires capital and strategy, but every little bit helps. Every little bit. The table went quiet. The discomfort was palpable. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, felt my phone buzz in my clutch. Landing now. Traffic might delay me. You have got this. I slipped the phone away and looked at Julian. He was waiting for a reaction, for defensiveness, for the wounded retreat he had learned to expect from me during our marriage. But I was not that woman anymore. Philanthropy takes many forms, I said calmly. Some people write checks. Some people do the work. Both matter. Of course they do. Geneva cleared her throat. I believe the salads are arriving. Shall we? The moment passed. Julian drifted back to his seat, 3 places down, close enough to watch me, far enough to pretend he was not. I focused on the salad I did not want. The conversation I barely heard, the minutes ticking by, and then something shifted. Now, if you are feeling the tension right now, if you want to see Julian get what is coming to him, hit that like button and let me know in the comments, because what happens next, nobody saw it coming. Conversations thinned, heads turned toward the grand entrance. Even the string quartet seemed to soften. A man walked in. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that did not need announcement. Dark suit, no tie, close-cropped hair with hints of grey at the temples, features carved with confidence rather than conventional handsomeness. The same man who had sat in a hotel bar 2 years ago and asked about my work like it was the most important thing in the world, Dominic. The event coordinator practically jogged to greet him, her hands clasped, nervous energy radiating off her in waves. Mr. Ashford, we are so honored you could attend. Your donation was extraordinarily generous, and thank you. He interrupted her gently. I am just here to enjoy the evening. The name rippled through the crowd. Dominic Ashford, $11 billion. The man who testified before Congress, the man who never gave interviews. Julian's posture changed. I saw it from across the table, the calculation entering his eyes. The opportunity he thought he was recognizing. He started to move, to intercept, to introduce himself, to work whatever connection might benefit his portfolio. But Dominic did not stop. He crossed the ballroom floor with singular focus, weaving past tables and startled faces, ignoring the outstretched hands and eager introductions, walking directly toward the table where I sat, toward me, his hand settled on my shoulder. Warm, familiar, steady, sorry. I am late. Love. His voice was soft, meant for me. Traffic from the airport was worse than expected. You made it. I reached for his hand. He laced his fingers through mine. That is what matters. He leaned down, pressed a kiss to my forehead, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Julian's face had gone blank, processing failing. Geneva leaned forward with undisguised delight. I do not believe we have met. I am Geneva Price. Dominic extended his hand. Dominic Ashford. A pleasure. The pleasure is mine. And how do you know our Amara? He looked at me then, and his eyes carried something the rest of the room would never fully understand. The years of late-night conversations, the quiet mornings, the way he held me when I thought I had nothing left to offer anyone, including myself. She is my wife. The words dropped into the silence like stones into glass. Wife. Someone's fork clattered against a plate across the table. A woman gasped softly. Geneva smiled so broadly I thought her face might split. Julian made a sound, something between a cough and a choke. Dominic pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat. His movements unhurried, entirely unbothered by the attention. He reached for my hand under the table, laced our fingers together again. To anyone watching, it looked casual, familiar, because it was. You started without me, he said, glancing at my barely touched salad. You said you would be late. I said I would try not to be. The ambassador cleared his throat. Mr. Ashford, we were not expecting. That is, we did not realize that I was married. Dominic's tone was pleasant, but there was an edge beneath it. I prefer to keep my personal life private. My wife prefers it even more. He looked at me, though I am realizing tonight that privacy has its downsides. Julian finally found his voice. You two are married. Dominic turned to face him. 18 months now. 18 months. I watched Julian's face as the timeline registered. 18 months of marriage. At least 2 years of relationship before that, which meant that by the time he was telling his friends I was a charity case, I had already built a life with one of the wealthiest men in the country. My apologies for any confusion. Dominic addressed the table. I do not often bring my wife to business events. She has her own work, and frankly, these dinners bore her. They really do. He squeezed my hand. The ambassador recovered first, Richard Voss. He extended his hand across the table. It is an honor to meet you both. The honor is mine, Dominic replied smoothly. I have been reviewing your proposal. Interesting approach to the European market. Voss beamed. Just like that, the table remembered how to breathe. Conversation resumed, but now it was directed at Dominic. Questions about quarterly projections, expansion timelines, risk assessment models. Julian sat frozen. His earlier confidence evaporated. The champagne flute in his hand seemed forgotten. Dominic handled each question with ease, but every few minutes his attention returned to me. Are you comfortable? I am fine. You are not fine. You hate crowds. I am tolerating crowds. He almost smiled. That is my girl, across the table. Julian was watching us. Not with anger anymore, with something worse. Recognition. He was seeing something he had never bothered to look for when we were married. The way Dominic listened when I spoke, the way his entire body angled toward mine like I was the only person in the room who mattered. The main course arrived. Filet mignon, with truffle reduction. I was not hungry anymore. Julian Knox, Dominic said suddenly, as if just noticing him. We met briefly at the Kia conference last year. Julian sat up straighter. Yes. I was not sure you would remember. I remember you pitched me on a sustainable housing development. That is right. How did that turn out? Julian hesitated. We are still seeking investors. Dominic cut into his steak. Amara, did you not review a housing project last month? The one with the modular designs? I did. What was your assessment? I could have deflected, could have kept playing the silent partner, but Julian's words from earlier were still burning in my chest. Not everyone has the disposition for serious philanthropy. I met his eyes across the table. Promising concept, I said clearly. Poor execution. The financial model assumed market conditions that do not exist. I recommended against investment. Dominic nodded. Your instincts are usually right. Usually. I raised an eyebrow. You married me. That was clearly excellent judgment. Despite everything, I laughed. It was a small sound, but but it cracked something open in my chest. Relief, release. The realization that I was sitting in a room full of people who wanted to be close to power, and power had chosen to sit beside me. Julian stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "You are evaluating investments." His voice cracked slightly. "For Lawson Capital. I consult for several firms," I replied. "Ashford Holdings is one of them." Julian's mouth opened, closed. "I did not know." "You never asked." The table had gone quiet again, but this time it was attentive silence. People were listening. "When we were married," I continued, keeping my voice even, "you told me I needed to think bigger. Stop being so careful. You said I would never make real money playing it safe. Amara, you were right. I was careful. I still am. That is why the 37 schools I have built are sustainable. That is why the curriculum I developed has been adopted by 4 countries. That is why the organizations I advise have seen an average return of 32%. Richard Voss whistled low. 32% compound annual growth. Dominic added, "She is selective about her projects." Julian's face had gone from pale to flushed. "When we were together, you never—" "I was still learning," I said simply, "and you were too busy telling me what I could not do to notice what I was actually doing." The dinner continued, but the dynamic had completely shifted. People directed questions to me now, asked my opinion on market trends, emerging sectors, risk mitigation strategies. I answered honestly, without pretense, without performing. Dominic sat beside me, his presence steady. He did not speak for me, did not interrupt, just existed as proof that I was exactly where I belonged. By the time dessert arrived, lavender panna cotta with honey drizzle, Julian had barely touched his food. Richard Voss stood and tapped his glass with a knife. "I would like to propose a toast," he announced, "to Dominic Ashford, whose vision continues to shape the future of capital investment." Glasses raised around the table. "And to his wife," Voss continued, nodding at me, "who apparently has been shaping it right alongside him." I smiled and raised my water glass. Julian did not toast. He was staring at the table, jaw tight. After dinner, Dominic handled the bill, covered the entire event without blinking. People lingered, networking, exchanging cards. Several approached me directly. One woman handed me her contact information. "I would love to discuss a project with you, if you have time. I will have my assistant reach out." Dominic appeared at my elbow. Ready, more than ready. We made our way toward the exit. I could feel eyes following us, some curious, some admiring, some still processing the evening's revelations. Julian intercepted us near the door. "Amara," his voice was quieter now, stripped of its earlier performance. "Can we talk? I do not think that is necessary. He ran a hand through his hair. "I did not know about any of this. You did not ask. I thought," he paused. "When we divorced, I thought you would struggle. I thought you needed me." Dominic's hand found the small of my back, not possessive, supportive. "I did struggle," I admitted, "for about 3 months. Then I remembered who I was before I spent all my energy trying to be what you needed." Julian's face crumpled slightly. "I made a mistake. You made a choice. So did I." His eyes flicked to Dominic, then back to me. "Is this why you did not fight the divorce? You were already with him." Dominic's voice was quiet but firm. "I met Amara 8 months after your divorce was finalized. At a conference in Boston, she was presenting on micro-investment strategies in developing markets. I sat in the back row, completely mesmerized. I remembered that day. Remembered seeing him afterward at the hotel bar, both of us exhausted from networking. He bought me coffee, not wine, asked about my work, not my relationship status. She did not need saving, Dominic continued. She needed someone who would not try to dim her light to make himself feel brighter. Julian flinched. "I hope your housing project finds funding," I told him. "But I will not be the one providing it." We left him standing there. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The valet brought Dominic's car, an understated sedan, not the sports car people probably expected. I exhaled slowly. "I did not want to come tonight." Dominic opened my door. "I know, I almost cancelled, but you did not." I slid into the passenger seat. I did not. He closed my door, walked around, settled behind the wheel, did not start the car immediately, just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, looking at me. You did not come to prove anything, he said finally. Number, you came because Victoria needed you, because you honor your commitments, because you belong in every room you enter, whether people recognize it or not. My throat tightened. Julian did not see that. Julian saw what he wanted to see. People usually do. He reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. But I see you, he said softly. All of you, and you are extraordinary. The city lights blurred slightly, not from tears. Well, maybe one or two. He started the car. We pulled away from the Ashton Grand Hotel, leaving the gala and the humiliation and Julian behind. My grandmother was right, I said after a few minutes. Some people can only love you if you are willing to stay smaller than they are. Dominic glanced at me. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. I looked out the window at the city passing by. She also said something else. She said the right person would not ask you to shrink. They would build you a bigger space to grow. Dominic was quiet for a moment. I hope I have done that. I looked at him, at this man who had flown across 3 time zones to be here tonight, who had never once asked me to diminish myself, who celebrated my ambition like it was oxygen. You have, I said, but you did not build it for me. You helped me remember I could build it myself. He reached over and took my hand. Even better, we drove home through streets slick with recent rain. The gala became a memory behind us. I thought about Julian, about the man I had married at 27, full of hope and blind to the ways he was already shrinking me. About the woman who had signed divorce papers, believing she had lost everything. About the 3 months of darkness that followed. And I thought about Zawadi, the little girl in Nairobi who read her own name for the first time. About the 37 schools standing in places where no schools had stood before, about the lives that had changed because I had refused to stay small. Julian had seen a woman who could not keep up. Dominic saw a woman who was always running her own race. Can I tell you something? I said as we pulled into our neighborhood. Anything. When we got married, I was afraid. Of what? That I would lose myself again. That I would start shrinking to fit into your world the way I shrunk into his, that I would wake up one day and not recognize myself. Dominic parked the car but did not move to get out. And now I know the difference, I said, between someone who asks you to be less so they can feel like more, and someone who asks you to be everything, because your everything is what they fell in love with. He turned to face me. The dashboard light caught his features, softening them. The man who runs an $11 billion empire. The man who sat in a hotel bar and asked about curriculum development. The man who married me in a courthouse with my grandmother's Bible in my hands. Amara, he said. The night I saw you present in Boston, I knew. Knew what? That I had spent my whole life building things that looked impressive on paper, but felt empty when I came home at night. And there you were, talking about children in villages I had never heard of. And for the first time in years I felt something. I waited. Purpose, he said. I felt purpose. And I realized I did not want to just write checks anymore. I wanted to matter in ways that could not be measured by returns. That is why you reached out, I said slowly, not because you were interested in me. Because you were interested in the work, he smiled slightly, at first. And then I spent 3 hours talking to you in that hotel bar, and I realized the work was not separate from you. It was you, your passion, your determination, your refusal to accept that the world could not be changed. He shook his head. I did not stand a chance. Neither did I. We sat there for a long moment. 2 people who had somehow found each other in the chaos of their separate ambitions. 2 people who had built something real in the privacy of their partnership. Thank you, I said. For what? For seeing me, not the woman Julian wanted me to be. Not the charity case, not the small thinking dreamer. Me. He leaned over and kissed my forehead the same way he had at the gala, gentle, unhurried. There was never anyone else to see. We went inside. Our home, simple by his standards, perfect by mine. A place we had chosen together, a space big enough for both of us to grow. I hung my gown in the closet, took off my grandmother's gold pins, slipped the cuffs from my wrists, and I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman who had survived 4 years of shrinking and 3 years of rebuilding, and 1 night of vindication. She looked tired, but she also looked free. Dominic appeared behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist. His chin rested on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I leaned back into him. "I am thinking about what I want to say tomorrow. At the follow-up meeting, Victoria scheduled it for noon. The donors from tonight want to hear more about the expansion plans." He smiled against my hair. "Of course they do." I turned in his arms to face him. "I am also thinking about Julian, are you? Not in the way you might worry about." I touched his face. "I am thinking about how sad it must be to spend your whole life measuring success by how small you can make other people feel, to never realize that true power is lifting others up, not pushing them down. He is missing out." Dominic agreed. "On you, on everything you are becoming." I shook my head. "He is missing out on himself, on who he could be if he stopped competing with everyone around him. That is the tragedy." We stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other, wrapped in the quiet of our home. Then Dominic pulled back slightly. "I have something for you." Now he disappeared into the other room, came back holding a small velvet box. "This was not the plan," he said. "I was going to wait for our anniversary, but after tonight it felt right." He opened the box. Inside was a pendant, simple gold chain, a single charm shaped like an open book with a small diamond embedded in the center. "For every story you help write," he said, "for every child who learns to read because you refuse to give up, for every life you change because you choose to stay big." My vision blurred, definitely tears this time. He fastened it around my neck. The pendant rested against my collarbone, light and warm. I looked at myself in the mirror again. The woman with the pendant, the woman with the man who understood, the woman who had walked into a room full of people who wanted to diminish her and walked out taller than she had ever been. Some women need a billionaire to rescue them. I just needed one who understood. I had already rescued myself. The city lights glittered outside our window. Somewhere out there, Julian was probably still processing what he had witnessed, still trying to reconcile the charity case he remembered with the woman who had evaluated his proposal and found it wanting. Let him process. I had more important things to think about. Schools to build, children to teach, a world to change, and a husband who would never ask me to be anything less than everything. I turned away from the mirror and took Dominic's hand. "Ready for bed?" he asked. "Almost, but first I want to call Victoria. I need to confirm some details for tomorrow." He laughed. "Always working, always, but also always loved. And that makes all the difference." We walked out of the room together, partners, equals, 2 people who had somehow found their way to each other in a world that tried to separate them. Tomorrow there would be meetings and presentations and plans to make. Tomorrow the work would continue, but with this quiet knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged. Not because of the man beside me, not because of the money or the name or the connections, because of who I had become. If this story reminded you of your worth, or made you think about someone who tried to make you feel small, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every week I am bringing you stories that remind us all what we are capable of. Until next time.